You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Now that you're self-actualized.
Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and the voice you just heard was Mr. Brett Newcomb.
Yes, I was trying to be self-actualized. I was being pensive and sardonic.
Self-actualizing me.
Well, yeah, I was doing something.
Because you were actually telling me that Congress can write a law and exempt themselves, and I was...
They do that all the time. Look at the healthcare system. They're not required to abide by the same healthcare that they write for us.
That I knew.
Or retirement.
Yeah. What I didn't know is that there were other laws that would apply universally to all Americans except to people who are in Congress.
Welcome to the real world.
Yeah. I'm flabbergasted. Duly incredulous.
Well, it's a good way to be.
Yeah. But we were going to talk about being self-actualized, and because we had recently talked about the idea of the difference between being alone and being lonely. And while we were exploring that, we thought about how this connects to self-actualization, because we got into a long discussion about meditation and ways in which people would achieve this idea of being able to be alone without being lonely. And then we thought about how that connects to this idea of self-actualization. And then what we actually came to realize is that we may not actually know,
be self-actualized.
Well, or know as much about that as we would purport to or want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but we both suffer from what Carl Rogers called unconditional positive regard. So it's very rare for us to admit this. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, so for what we then discovered, we found an article that actually compared the thoughts of Maslow to the thoughts of Rogers. And one of the things that I recognized is that we all learn about Abraham Maslow, and we all learn about his hierarchy of needs and this concept of self-actualization. But unless you really study Maslow specifically, you may not hear any more about him.
It's Maslow.
Maslow.
Yeah, look at the word. No F.
There's a W.
Low. Say that. Lowly. Yeah, I agree. And the thing I learned about him, and the thing that always pops into my mind when somebody says his name, is that whole thing about peak experiences. Mm-hmm. That there are 2, 3, 4 times in a lucky person's life where all the stars align and everything comes to them at one moment of awareness that's an incredibly positive peak moment of their life, and that those are the defining marker points in our life if we get to them. Mm-hmm. And so then you start looking beneath that peak experience concept to say, well, how does one do that? Mm-hmm. And he talks about self-actualization, and you have to learn. He identified 17 characteristics of self-actualization, and then recently some other guy, Barry Kaufman, did some research on Maslow's 17 points and said, well, 10 of them still apply. 10 of them are still valid in the world today as we know it. And if you can put together a package of most of these 10, then you're a pretty self-actualized person. Mm-hmm. So what does self-actualization actually mean?
Well, and how is that different than in sports psychology, what they call being in the zone?
I'm not sure it's different at all. I think that another word for the same experience. Well,
and I have a very limited background of playing sports, but I can remember times where, I would be on a football field, and for whatever reason, for me, it seemed to be happenstance. Everything just seemed to slow down, and everybody seemed to be moving in slow motion, and I seemed to be able to predict what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And in those moments, you can be a very high level. I'm not a very high level player, not a very high level athlete, but in those moments, it felt like you could be great. And maybe that's the difference between my sport ability and a professional athlete's is that they're capable of being in the zone more times than not. But we both experienced that when we've been skiing, and there have been times where you just felt like that you were very, very in tune with your skis and with the mountain. And to me, those feel like peak experiences.
As opposed to the other times when your primary awareness is, oh crap,
Yeah.
what am I doing here? How am I going to get out of this? Yeah, I agree with you. I think that when what you're saying, labeling as in the zone, I think the same thing happens when you do good therapy. When there's harmony between you and the client, and clarity, and the absence of masks and manipulations, it's like a peak experience. I think things come together, and there's that aha positive experience of I really understand this, I really see this. Not you, the therapist, understand the client, but for the two of you in that dance of relationship to get to a place where you're both somewhat awed, like, oh my gosh, this is powerful, this is good. And I suspect that it can be similar in any field. I mean, if you're a preacher, there are public speaker, there are times when the dance between the presenter and the audience are almost ethereal. They're very powerful and high energy and positive, but they're not jacking around. They're not dancing and screaming. I mean, it's just a moment where everything just comes with crystal clarity and peacefulness. And so I would say that's my understanding in short of what Maslow or Rogers talk about when they talk about self-actualization.
And this process of us talking about this and then looking into it, doing some research, and then talking about it now has been really powerful for me, because when I originally thought about Maslow and the idea of self-actualization, maybe just because of the title self-actualization, my perception was that that was some kind of deep, intuitive, maybe epiphanal understanding of the self, but that isn't really necessarily what is required to be able. You could be in the zone, you could have a peak experience and not necessarily understand yourself well.
Yeah, I think so. It's just the experience of having everything to come together right at that moment when you need it.
Now, I guess that understanding yourself well maybe leads more frequently to peak experiences.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Not having had so many.
But my understanding then of the concept has actually evolved as a result of us thinking about this, because I think I was thinking about it maybe not inaccurately, but less clearly than the way that we're talking about it now.
Well, but when you look at both Maslow and Rogers break it down into components.
Yeah.
And one of the ones that really strikes me in Maslow's list is continued freshness of appreciation.
Yeah.
And the description that he gives is self-actualizing people have the wonderful capacity to appreciate again and again, freshly and naively, the basic goods of life with awe, pleasure, wonder, and even ecstasy, however stale these experiences may have become to others. So when I read that, what I become aware of are those moments where that's what I have felt. I mean, you watch a child discover a frog, watch a child play, and just look at the world, how they stare and study and are awed by an ant crawling along the trail carrying a piece of bread, 3 times its body weight or 10 times its body weight. You and I get jaded by our experiences. We're rushing to the next event, the next thing. But a child is just there. He's just experiencing it. And then therein lies one of the critical junctures in counseling. Is it about an understanding and a logical discussion and a factual examination of why is your life screwed up and why do you hurt? Or is it about an experiential moment where there's peace and quietness and strength? Or is it some combination of the two? Can we get there with both limbs of that to that peak experience point? So I think it's an ongoing issue. You know, is therapy about solving the problem in a logical, analytical way with all the definitions in a row, or is it about experiencing yourself as being at peace with yourself, as Carl Rogers says, unconditional positive regard? I've done some bad things. I've I wish I had done other things, but basically I recognize I'm a pretty good person and I like who I am.
But then I wonder if human nature is to try and create a sense of order and to be able to expect the events in a chronological order as a way to feel safe and secure, and
To structure the world.
Yeah.
I mean, your mind works that way to make sense out of the data that's coming in. So, I mean, you've seen all those experiments with photographs that just show a partial picture.
Right.
And the concept is called closure.
Yeah.
And so your mind tries to close in the gaps of the picture and make a complete picture. We are made that way. Our mechanism works that way.
So, and I don't mean to, with this comment, to belittle anybody's experience if somebody got the COVID-19 or, God forbid, had a loved one die.
Right.
But then would there be a way for us to think in terms of the pandemic if we say we want to be open to these fresh appreciations? Is there anything about that we could say, I want to be more open to?
Well, I think there's a reality testing ingredient. You know, in poker, they say check your hole card. You know, and this pandemic is requiring some of us to check our hole card. What do we really value? Who do we really value in our lives? What do we need in our lives? And what's just dross? What's just decorative background noise?
Yeah, and that's something that I've been thinking a lot about. I mean, you know, the sports leagues shut down, the Hollywood shut down.
The distractors.
Yeah, I mean, all the things that we normally think of. Now, as a result of that, you know, obviously the symphony also shut down, which, you know, may be on a different level than those things. But all of those distractor things shut down. They were non-essential.
Thank goodness the TV preachers didn't shut down.
Yeah, and, you know, but the garbage men are still working.
Yeah.
And they're essential. But we don't think of them as essential. People who are working in the grocery stores are still there working.
Right.
And they're essential, but we traditionally don't think of them as essential. Those are people that we usually think of with great disdain, or at least with indifference. And now we're looking at our society and we're recognizing what is actually essential and non-essential. And I wonder if that is going to be pervasive at all. If this is all over, if we're going to come out of this with a different appreciation of what those essential functions are.
Well, it's an opportunity for us to consider that. I don't know what the conclusion is going to be. My bigger question about the opportunity is, will people slow down and appreciate it?
Yeah.
Will they process it? Or will they just blow through it and move on to the next thing?
Because after 9/11, you know, everybody was flying American flags and people were out in their front yards talking to their neighbors.
But that was a visible enemy. You knew where they were.
Yeah.
You were told where they were, whether that turned out to be true or not. And we went off to war to fight that visible enemy in another country. This is something you can't see. You don't know where it is. You don't know who has it. You don't know who's communicating it. You don't know if it's going to get you. But it's a dangerous world.
But what, you know, I was thinking about in terms of that was that there was a coming together and people were very unified.
Yeah.
And that wasn't pervasive. And now we're more polarized than we've ever been because we didn't hang on to that. And I don't know if we're going to be able to hang on to the lessons that we learned from this experience, or if we're so scared that we're going to try and block this, repress it from our minds, and go back to what is, quote, normal as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Because I think there are lessons that can be and should be learned from what we're going through. This idea of what is really essential, I think, is important, and I hope people are actually considering that, and I hope that as a society that we're going to be able to take that forward with us.
Well, that's interesting, the whole concept of society. You know, we talk about they.
Yeah.
And we try to make sure that our they is in control and making the decisions. And when their they is in control, we're angry and violated and cheated and upset. And I'm always mindful of what Albert Schweitzer said. it's better to light a single candle than to curse the darkness. So, as an individual, you can make a move about how you're going to behave and live and understand. You can't make society make the same move.
Well, no. But, what I am thinking, though, is that as a society, and whether or not we're globalizing this, so as a world, but as a society, we have decided on what is essential and what isn't. Now, obviously, there are some things that we might.
Well, I don't know that we've decided. Someone has decided.
Someone has decided.
Yeah, someone in authority.
But I think that for the most part, we probably would agree. Now, I may not agree that liquor stores are essential, but I do agree that the garbage does need to be collected, that, healthcare workers need to be on the job, that grocery store employees should be working, or that it is beneficial that they are working. And I am trying to absorb into me an appreciation for these things that are essential while we're experiencing this. And I want to try and be mindfully aware of that so that I can carry that forward. But I don't know if as a group that society is going to, because what I'm afraid of is that we're going to try and repress this because it's been such an anxiety-inducing thing that we're going to have trouble being able to carry it forward. So we're going to try and deny it.
So I always fall back on the tripartite personality theory of Sigmund Freud, the id, the ego, and the superego. This kind of value that you are expressing is more of a superego grounded thing, but operates mostly from the ego. I mean, the superego suggests that the ego has the legs; it can make something happen or not happen. But what you can't forget is at the same time, there's an id saying, I want it now, give it to me, all the time in all caps. So a healthy adult person, male or female, has to achieve a level of balance where they are addressing the needs of all three of those personality parts. And so when you say, well, when we come out of this, what are we going to be like individually and culturally? It depends on where the predominant focus of our culture is. Is it in the id, immediate gratification at all times for all things? Is it in the ego, let's be rational and problem solve? Or is it in the superego, let's be moralistic and make higher order ethical choices? And historically, we have been more id and ego.
Right, because I think that's more human nature. So human nature, I think that society is going to follow human nature, and that's human nature. And so I agree with that. Number 8 on Roger's list is being able to take feedback from experiences.
Right.
And so my hope is that we will be able to take feedback from this experience and that we will be able to learn a valuable lesson from it. I don't know if we're going to be able to, but if we're going to be able to, like you were just talking about, it is better to light a single candle than curse the darkness. Right. People are going to have to talk about it. It's going to have to be something that is pervading the zeitgeist of the societal consciousness. And so people like us saying, hey, this is an opportunity for us to be able to take something from this experience and to be able to learn and become better for it. If that kind of catches on and people start to reinforce that, then that's going to enhance the probability. So anybody who thinks that that might be something that would be valuable to take from this experience needs to reinforce that in their own communities, and hopefully that will catch on.
But you have to remember, it's a two-edged sword. You have the individual opportunity to have that kind of an awareness impact your behavior and your choices. Your hope is that societally, a larger and larger number, maybe even a preponderance of us, would make similar interpretations of the new reality.
Oh, that's a great point.
Because I may do it personally. I may be a better man coming out of this in terms of my greed, my selfishness, my sharing ability, capacity, my support for my neighbors. But I may live in a community where that's not the interpretation when we come out of this. We have lost ground to make up. We have to get ours back. I've lost money in the stock market. I've lost my job. I need an income. Get out of my way. I want to be first in line. So I think you're talking philosophically, culture as a whole, you hope there's a greater concern for the great unwashed. How are they surviving? Do we have a social responsibility to take care of them? They're living in tent cities across from City Hall. Is there something that we can and should do about their quality of life? Or do we take the position they are free grown-ups, they've made their choices, they've made their mistakes, you reap the harvest of what you sow? I think somewhere in between is where most of us fall. And if I'm hearing your argument accurately, you're hoping that when we come out of this, most of us will fall more on the interconnected social support side of the ledger.
Well, I just really try and be mindful that but by the grace of God go I. And that the things that separate us are more random chance than anything that we've derived for ourselves. People who...
Which a lot of us are learning if we live one paycheck from disaster.
Exactly.
I saw a thing the other day that said 39% of the American population does not have as much as $400 saved. So if they have to buy a new tire for their car, they can't get there. That's an unacceptable number. That's just unbelievable. But is that because of the personal choices of those individuals? You see people that are homeless having Apple iPhones that cost $600-700. That's where they chose to spend their money. That's their free choice as an adult. They pay for the service. They get the phone service. Is that a good decision, a smart decision, a socially beneficial decision? Or is it all just personal decisions? And we are challenged as a culture with walking between those raindrops.
But, I take your point that what I deem is important may not be what society as a whole ends up deeming is important. And so I'm humbled by you pointing that out. But at the same time, society has decided what is essential and non-essential in this moment. And I don't think that is a hoax. I don't think it is an accident. I think that this has shown us starkly what is the difference between what is essential and non-essential. And that people can learn from this if they want to. They don't have to, and they may not. But I would like to believe that there is a in the what is it, the angels of our nature,
better angels
of our nature, and that we are going to be able to carry forward. And that people will remember a year from now, that people will remember, and even if it just is, you see the guy taking your garbage, say hey to him. Learn his name.
Say thank you.
Make it seem like he matters. I mean, that could be huge.
Well, I was in the grocery store the other day, and the people working in the grocery store were trying to impose social distance rules for the grocery store and the safety features that they put in place for sanitation and so on. But every one of them that I passed, I said out loud to their face, thank you for being here. It's really important that you're here, and I appreciate it. I don't know if that makes any difference or not to the world, but it does to me.
I think it absolutely does. And here's the thing, and this is why I am somewhat buoyed up and think that this might be something that can change our perception of the world. People after the Desert Storm and then the subsequent, interactions that we've had in Afghanistan after 9/11, people became very aware that the returning military personnel were not treated well after Vietnam. And whether or not they agreed with the politics of what happened,
they supported the soldiers.
They were supporting the soldiers, and they would go out and if you saw a man in uniform at the airport, you would shake his hand and say thank you for your service. That became something that pervaded our consciousness, and people still do that today. And we could do the same thing with people who work in the grocery store, people who collect garbage.
If you watch the news at all, you see that happening all around the world. People in major cities around the world are outside clapping and applauding their first responders and their healthcare workers. for the risks they're taking on our behalf,
Right.
to make our lives possible.
And I think that we could remember to do that even after this is over. We could make it something that pervaded just our awareness and just became normal, everyday kind of behavior. And I think that that can make a difference. If you ask a military person, when somebody sees you at the airport in uniform and they thank you for your service, does that matter? I've never heard anybody say, no, I wish they wouldn't do that.
Yeah. I don't know. I think those are interesting concepts. And I get reduced back to the Albert Schweitzer thing of how do I make a choice that at the end of the day brings me balance and peace and self-actualization, and allows me to make a positive contribution.
Yeah. So hopefully this has been something that will spark everybody to have some kind of internal dialogue with themselves. As Brett has rightly pointed out, self-actualization is about the self. And so whatever we think is the lessons that should be learned from this experience may not necessarily be the lessons that are important for you as an individual or for us as society to learn. And that's an important thing for me to hear. But hopefully everybody will think about this for themselves and will actively try and promote what they feel like is important that we take out of this, and that we as a society can have a conversation and come to some conclusions. Because if we just lose the moment and get out of this experience and are invested in nothing more than trying to reestablish our own financial well-being, I think that's missing the point.
Oh, I agree.
So if you have any comments, suggestions, or things that you would like us to cover, get us at psychwithmike.com. Remember to tell a couple of people to listen to Psych with Mike, turn them on to the show. The music that you hear in Psych with Mike is provided for us by Mr. Benjamin DeClue, and if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.